being in the screen in the school. It's very like 70s video art going on there.
The recordings are pretty grainy too.
Okay. Oh yeah.
It's like the first one that we saw looked really good, but then after they figured it, it looked like this.
There's a,
Okay, cool. So if I don't want this up,
I think because we're recording, I can
just minimize
try
it.
to
Okay.
minimize as much as I can. There we
Okay,
go.
that's fine. That's fine. I'll just open up.
Just because it's recording, it won't let me fully minimize.
Cool.
But
All right. I'll pull up
All
this slide. All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm super excited to be here. I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement, and then we'll talk about the program for the day. The University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Alegi, the traditional indigenous homelands of the Kalapuya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, the Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the coastal reservations to the coastal reservation in Western Oregon. Today, descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make important contributions to their communities at University of Oregon and across the land we now refer to as Oregon and around the world. We express our respect for all federally recognized tribal nations of Oregon. I think the land acknowledgement, me and Sarah were just talking about this, the land acknowledgement is really an important statement. At the same time, obviously, it needs to be followed up by us as individuals and in our roles at various institutions. And so I'm proud to give the acknowledgement today. I'm Colin Ives. I'm the director of CFAR. Today we're having a conversation about our CPI program, which is CFAR's Project Incubator, which was actually initiated. The program was initiated by Brian Gillis, who is the founding director of CFAR. Absolutely visionary. I'm super glad you're here in the room. Absolutely kind of beautiful idea of having this kind of speculative framework for artists to come in and have access to the facilities here and the kind of mental space of the Knight Campus. So he set up this program between CFAR in partnership with the Phil and Penny Knight Campus for accelerating scientific impact as a means of have all of the words here and I'm just losing it. So that's fine. So what we're going to do here today is we're going to have each of the artists present. I'm going to actually have them introduce themselves. But we're going to go by, so there's been 2 years of this program. I was actually, before I became director, I had been selected as a fellow. So I am myself a fellow. And I'm in the first year's group of programs, but I'd like, if you don't mind, Carla, I'm going to ask all of the first year resident fellows to come and sit at the table up here. No, you're second year. And then, so we're going to have each of these people present. We're going to have some time for our conversation amongst the group. But each artist will present individually, and then we'll open it up and we'll have some time for questions. All right. Yeah, Carla didn't want to sit up front. Oh, okay. Everyone's like going to be like fighting the camera. Like, this is the way it goes. Yeah, so this is the first year's, we're missing only Brian House, I believe, from that first year program, and John Park. So those are two of the artists who were in the fellowship who weren't able to be here. I'm actually going to start with Karen, since you were actually the very first artist in residence.
You want me to come up now?
Yes, that would be great.
I wanted to say, because Colin mentioned that it might be nice to have, objects, and so we've all brought some objects that we picked. So I have an assortment, a rather messy assortment of objects here, that anyone's welcome to take a look at. I think I'll just bring this one up. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm taking the 5 minutes that we were told really seriously. So actually, I need. And I have a 3-minute video and then some slides that I'll run through really quickly. I'm Karen Bollender, and I was the first one in here, which was really interesting and awesome. And okay, what I'm going to do first is show the video. And just to introduce it, my project was the raw post library generator, which with Jordy we created over the course of the residency. So let's see, where am I? Okay, so this is a behind the scenes tour of the raw post library generator in action. We did. Sorry, I didn't do full screen. So that is the raw post library generator in action. Okay, sorry, not used to this. Okay, I'm going to start my 2 minutes. And okay, so the raw post library has been opening since 2020. And the main thing, if I say any small amount of words about what this project is today, I just want to say that it is an apparatus for processing uncertainty. And if I say only that, I think that will be enough. But I'll say just a couple more things because I have 1 minute and 19 seconds left. This is a view of the post library generator wired up. It was designed to operate on hot compost power and flow from the pond and creek nearby. And the post library existed before the compost generator, but Jordy and I developed a thermoelectric device that theoretically would use the hot compost and the cold water to generate some energy. For what is the question and remains the question. And that's the most important thing. I heard there was some use of the whiteboards in that room. So I just wanted to, this delta T is difference, and in this case, temperature. It can also be difference and time. And this was my sort of thematic obsession during the residency and with this project in general, that has stretched out in a lot of metaphorical and material and mechanical ways that are interesting. So I'll just give you that. We've been playing with that idea of difference in a lot of ways that way. So I wrote it in mud on the whiteboard. Oh, I'm done. Okay, I'm going to go so fast. A project called The Pulping does work behind the scenes of the raw post library. I won't go into that now. Just want to show you the unclean room, which was the manifestation of the here in the Knight Campus. And there are some folks that were part of this mud cake and compost tea party here for that event. And then this was related to some work that was done back at my home, which is known as the Rural Alchemy Workshop. And again, thank you to all the people who were part of that. A recent event called the Raw Post Library Temps Perdu Party with, again, folks who have been collaborating on this project for a long time that I'm very grateful for. And most importantly, my thank you slide. I just wanted to make sure to have time for this because I'm so grateful to Brian initially for helping me think about how my work at the Rural Alchemy Workshop could function in this residency, in this place. We had some amazing conversations initially going into that, and I'm so grateful for that. And Colin, we had some amazing conversations. Carla came to the unclean room, and then the pulping posse, all of you who want to be part of that and who are, I'm so grateful for, and have come year after year, 3 years now, we've been doing this work around the pond and with the mud. And then I want to thank the Just Futures Institute and the Center for Environmental Futures for supporting this work also, and the Mellon Foundation, and of course, Center for Art Research and CPI. And of course, this is work in process. And so it goes on like changing weather and seasons toward unforeseeable forms. No, I can do it.
Hey, so I'm Carla Bainson. I've taught here forever. I'm semi-teaching here now. And I was a second resident here. So some of you know my work, some do not. So I thought I'd just, introduce myself a little bit. I make work by, for, and with other species, often in collaboration with scientists, sometimes with dancers, composers, perfumers, philosophers, and anthropologists. This is my current quote that I'm obsessed with. Animals move finished and complete, gifted with extensions of the senses we have lost or never attained. They live by voices we shall never hear. They are other nations. And I like to think of that quote in relation to Aristotle's perspective on speech and politics to explain what I do, which is basically to draw attention to animal voices and nations. So if a speaking being is a political being, would our political alliances shift if we were to learn the embodied language of another creature? So that's what I set out to do. I've learned to speak lizard. That is to bob my finger using the complex patterns of head bobs that fence lizards use to communicate across distances. And I've made a hiker's bandana with a handy lizard decoder so others too can speak lizard. So this is a graph of the species identification pattern that the nation of Scoloporus uta fence lizards use to communicate with one another. So it's basically like waving a flag. It's their species identification pattern of head bobs. So these head bobs are actually socially learned. We think of animals as not having language and not having culture, but many do. So it's socially learned. They exhibit regional dialects and they make use of syntax. So I paired this graph, which I can teach you later if you're interested, with a human gestural language, which is ASL. So thinking about intersections between human and non-human animal communication strategies and cultures. So that was part of an exhibition I did. Actually, Jesse Vallet was part of. That was here at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum. It was open for 3 days before it was closed by COVID, so nobody saw it. But it was a multi-year project, and these are some of the collaborators and some of the sensory forms that the exhibition involved. So besides my human collaborators, some of my non-human collaborators have included orchid bees, ants, chameleons, snakes, birds, monkeys, crows, and most recently, ground squirrels and prairie dogs. So what I proposed for my residency was primarily to meet with a range of scientists to discuss their research and just to kind of get ideas for new work. So I'm primarily interested in research that intersects with questions of human and non-human sensory modalities and behaviors, especially where they're impacted by climate change. So I won't go into this because I don't have time, but some of the takeaways about olfaction in mice, birdsong, decision-making and arousal states in human and non-human animals is now informing some new work. So right after this residency, which was in January last year, I went to do a collaborative residency at the UC research station in the Anza-Borrega Desert. I should mute this. It's not letting me. Oh, well. I'll just scroll. So this was, can you hear me at all? Sort of. How do I? You cover over the video or the bottom right? I don't do PowerPoint. The video itself. There. Of course. So yeah, I don't do PowerPoint, excuse me. So I began working on costumes for this sequence of performances that are going to take place in Death Valley while I was here during my residency. So the performances invite park visitors to join us in imagining our past, present, and uncertain future in this extreme landscape. They take place over 3 days at various sites, evoking a symbolic movement through time as the universe is formed, mountains rise, the planet warms, and lake beds dry up. And then they end in this speculation on our future as we contemplate a vast climate-propelled northward migration of people and species. I'll just speed it up. So some of the choreography was informed by animal movement, the way animals move in the desert specifically. And then, so this will be part of the migration dance up the dune and out of the North Dunes in Death Valley. So I'm really interested in how animal modes of being might inform aesthetics. Again, I'll silence it. So thinking about creative forms across the senses, specifically thinking about camouflage, which I've thought about for some time, and trying to move beyond visual camouflage. And by the way, this is not nearly that red. The colors are better on the back screen. But thinking about animal camouflage strategies across the senses. So motion camouflage, olfactory camouflage, sonic camouflage. So for example, that was Jesse's statue in that last piece, by the way. I'll give you a better glimpse of it. Wait, if I can. No, I can't, sorry. So thinking about predator-prey, motion camouflage strategies. So in this example, this is the target moving towards there. So the predator that is also camouflaged visually can't move directly to it, because as soon as it moves, it will be more visible. So it moves strategically along it. So it's maintaining the same relationship to the background as the prey. This is an example of what happens when a camouflaged I'm going to say animal because it takes too long to say more than human moves in relation to a background. And some species have evolved, like cuttlefish have evolved optical skins that allow them to update their pattern in relation to the background as they move. So, for example, we can't do that because we don't have optically active skins, but I'm thinking of ways to do that. Another strategy they use, which is not to, is to actually like confuse the predator. This is a strategy that prey use, so that they appear to move more slowly, or in this case, more quickly. I'm sorry, it's the reverse. And then, or diagonally. So they become a very hard target to assess. So one of the things I did while I was here was try to learn to use the large scale laser cutter to create a large camo net that could be used kind of similar to an optical skin. So dancers could pull it around themselves to change the pattern, move with it. So imagine like 20 dancers moving down a hillside, so that depending on how they're using it, obviously it wouldn't be this pattern. It would appear that the mountain was moving, or it would appear that they were moving more quickly or more slowly. Sonic camouflage is something I thought about during my residency, talking with some of the researchers about birdsong and how they vary their pitch to be more easily, or to be easier to locate or harder to locate. And I was also thinking about olfaction. I am working on a project with olfaction. I've done a series of perfumes. I studied perfume making. So this is a perfume I did that is based on orchid bee scent. Orchid bees collect scents and create perfumes to attract a mate. So this is based on one of their scents. This is based on lizard scent pheromones, which they also use to communicate. Actually smells good, and you can taste the related compounds, and it's something I do. So lastly, what I'm working on now is olfactory camouflage. So both prairie dogs and some species of ground squirrels that co-evolved with rattlesnakes, which are their primary predators, developed a strategy where they chew molted rattlesnake skin and then they lick their fur. So they actually smell like a rattlesnake, and a rattlesnake is hesitant to try to strike them, and they're harder to detect in their burrows. So rattlesnakes actually smell funky, but their molted skin smells like cucumber. So the perfume will have top notes of cucumber, middle notes of prairie, and bottom notes of musk, which they also use to create kinship bonds and altruistic bonds, with a touch of smoke of distant fires. That's what I'm working on. So I have a couple samples you can look at later. This is actually, I want to share the perfume maybe on hide, like possibly covering the wall with hide so that the scent of the hide becomes part of the olfactory experience in the room. And I want to have a tactile, something happening tactily with the fur. And there's a little cucumber in here if you want to smell it. And this is just an example of kind of taking the camo netting into a three-dimensional relationship to two dimensions. That's what I got.
I was actually the third resident in this context. In deference to my peers and colleagues here, I'm going to be really short. But I love what, I mean, again, like what's great about the residency is it's intended as this kind of speculative space and also generative, right? So I love that Carla talked about how much of the work like happened after the residency, right? Like that's actually kind of built into the expectations of the program, which again, I also found as super generous when I was a participant. So at the time that I was in residence, and my proposal was, I was thinking about these ancient technologies, right? Which this is an orrery. So they were these kind of mathematical models that were both practical and ornate, that they like located us culturally in the world in relationship to our knowledge at the time, right? And so often, even like now, like in the last 6 months, like AI is everywhere. There's a new article on the fear or possibility of AI every moment. And in a way, what I was thinking was how our current technologies largely don't have this kind of area of reflection. In fact, they're all kind of function within a black box, right? So often they're accepted into culture in a way that we are, intended to let them disappear and not think about the underlying meaning. So I was really kind of inspired about this older version of technology, of locational devices, mathematical models of the universe, and how they kind of operate as think space as well as practical objects. So my first take was to work with Jordy and have plant pods scanned. So my basic kind of first dive into it was to simply kind of build my own orrery, but replace all the planets with plant parts and not really pay much attention to their, I didn't do any of the kind of deep dive that Carla's work represents in terms of making those connections. It was really just like a straightforward gesture. And so this is what happened during the course of my residency, was this single object. This is a movie. Anyway, that's fine. So, and again, like that was actually a lot to contend with, frankly, in the time frame that I had. And during the summer afterwards, this idea started coming up. And this is actually, I'm in a part of a collective called Fuel Ladder, which includes Karen and Brian Gillis and a number of other participants, but those are the people here. And it's a group that's really thinking about wildfire and our landscape and the climate crisis. So this is another kind of locational device. It's the Osborne Firefinder that you find in any fire lookout. So it's a way you'd see a smoke plume in the distance, and then you would use that to triangulate on a map. So I've replaced the centerpiece with an actual topography. And I think between the two groups, Jordy's going to show us some of the kind of plans, and I know she has a video of this being machined. So this is just a detail. And then this is the kind of final piece. So again, like I just wanted to kind of show one little tiny piece of the trajectory. I've got actually multiple projects going on now, all related to fire. wildfire issues, but really do come out of that generative space of the CPI fill. All right, thank you. And Mary is the next artist in terms of following this by the order which we were in residence. Close that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, hello everyone. I am Mary Pallades. I am from a bit of a different ilk. I'm from the architecture department. So thank you for having me as part of this maybe very arts heavy fellowship. It was really a great experience for me to not only work with the expertise, but then find my way through all of the features that were here. So I'll try to be brief as well. But the work that I did in this really set the foundation for my research today. And I now have a tenure track over in the architecture department because of this. So kudos to all of you guys for helping me get there. So mine is called Ecological Scaffolds, and largely I've been exploring the space between infrastructure and living systems in architecture. It's an area of research that's not really focused on because you're either an architect or landscape architect, and that intersection isn't as richly divided or intersected as you might think. So this work is contextualized within the Anthropocene, where I think many of us know what this means, but we're working in an age in which most of the things we've created have been developed from our actions, right? And that finding natural specimens and ecologies is not as, it's hard to find without our touch being there. So in my industry, the architectural and construction industry, our response to this is looking at how to reduce our carbon footprint through the embodied carbon emissions and also the operating emissions. Now, what that means in terms of design is that you're going to get to see a lot of this greenwashing across architecture. And so it's very avant-garde to put a lot of green into your building and try to mitigate that carbon. However, my research is pointing the finger at why that's not doing the action that we're saying that it does. I, just as a background, have been working in landscape and architecture firms for the last 20 years, and I know how living well our infrastructure works and the needs behind it, as well as the more innovative and explorative methods that are at hand. So 3D printing actual materials for living systems, different geometries or kind of portable modules, all of them are being explored across the world at this very moment, but they all are assuming the same baseline that's incorrect. And so that is around this topic of maintenance and failure. And I can tell you, coming from the industry, this is where, if you're talking about bringing something living inside, this is what the client wants to know. They want to know how does it die and how much energy does it take to maintain it. So as a point of example, this beautiful tower that's a conceptual development for New York is boasting 1,600 trees and 300,000 square feet of living plant wall as part of this, green architecture movement to mitigate carbon. And I will tell you that the reason that this will fail is because living systems usually have a lifespan of 2 to 5 years. So if you're telling me you're going to put that much living system into your building, the amount of buy and die strategy to make that work is massive. The reason that this is happening is largely because of a kind of assumed relationship of living systems to be in an artifact and what we call root-bound growth. So if you have a pot in your house, I'm sure you've seen this, those things will suffocate because they just keep growing down, 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 and they will eventually just stop. This is related to kind of technology. If you look back across cultures, no matter if it was in the East, the South, wherever you have, we all developed this kind of artifact that would take it out of its systemic relationships and kind of manifest it in something we could control through our technology at the time. This was manifested even more popularly in the Victorian era. Even though we were a little bit more advanced in terms of time, it wasn't really evolved past the artifact of a vessel. So my work has been looking at how do we go from an objectification of a living system that's extensive into a systemic relationship for our indoor environments. And I promise you it's not this long. I will get to the where I am. So the baseline of that, how do we do living systems growth with our human behaviors? Because that's what we want, but we don't know how to actually do it. The work for CFAR, I applied with this project I had developed during COVID. As an architect, I work long hours, and when I was put next to my 3D printer, I started 3D printing those long hours in my room. And so I developed a methodology in which I could map my space and then 3D print these modules to allow for kind of a more branching system of root logics to be incorporated into my room. And so this work really launched the fellowship in my time here, where I took that topic and I extended it across 6 different prototypes. So during my fellowship, I did have a little bit of an exhibition up on the breezeway. And it was looking at different morphologies of how roots could exist within our built environment, and not looking at a vessel, looking at a more extensive application and material. So you can see the 6 here. I'll talk through them quickly. But the part of this that I loved was that I became a pro in the fabrication lab downstairs. This is my day-to-day, bouncing between the greenhouse, the fabrication center, and then cleaning up a bunch of machines and prototypes all the time. So it was quite fun, but I did sleep on the floor of the fellows room from time to time. So these prototypes were explored across a variety of medias and built out of different materials, and also had a different baseline of growing medias we were exploring. The first one coming off of my rhizomes was looking at branching systems. With the new facilities here, rather than having my 5-component system printed quite largely, I developed it in a 12-component because the mechanics of the material were much improved. It was great, but the scale was smaller, so we were making these prototypes, not real living application. And then spray painting them. You can still see the damage out in the parking lot if you look. This was the final install of that the night before, and then when I had my friend come out and manifest it with her species. Then working off of that, I developed a branching series that you can see at my desk, and a whole array of testing for that. We call these the squid series. One of the fundamental issues in the root-bound growth is that you're not working with the logics of the root, and that when it hits air, it self-prunes. If you introduce that into the morphology, you will not have this problem. And so that's what a lot of this work was working around, was looking at the branching pattern, how to introduce air but keep moisture. And that's where this series, you start to see the slits that start to bring in that idea and that concept into this kind of branched pattern. These were largely using the Fuse, which is my favorite machine to date, because it gets very detailed geometries. It just takes a lot of time to get there. So you can welcome to come up and see these afterwards. These ones were working off of capillary action, but they were small prototypes made with my printer at home. Then going from the branching prototypes, rather than a linear system, we looked at how to matricize or create bricks out of these with matrices, and looking at gradient densities. So when you're looking at a root, you want it to be moist, but then you need to introduce that air. And these were always patterns of gradient densities that would introduce that with a different media. So you can see these, we call these the bricks. These were great because the Fuse detail was lovingly, really precise. A lot of cleaning though. The Kazi, the gentleman who was running it at the time, told me not to do a lot of things, but I went out and did it anyway. From the matrices, I went into topographies where we tried to look at panelized systems of this and how that would come indoors. You can see some patterns here. And then off of those small panelized system, taking it into a different printer that looks at resin and more pillars, that could be with the combinatory method of planting with hydroponic pads that would allow for more delicate species to come in. So looking at how to reduce the carbon in a real way, looking at more extensive coverings rather than plants that are meant to grow like this. This is part of the conceptual baseline that's incorrect. These plants in our homes usually grow over to 80 to 100 feet tall. Rather, why aren't we looking at more short, small systems that have fine taproots that would cover our interiors with much more grace and less intensity? So that was this whole series, looking at that. And then I have these all here so you can see them. Then the last one was the waves, which we scaled up to a larger one using subtractive methods with the CNC, but we still wanted to have some larger prototypes that were actually planted. And these were in the greenhouse before plantings, just with a typical mix of soil and some moss, and then planting them with chia, because that's the fastest one to grow within the shortest amount of time of production. And then testing out the patterns and where the roots deposition and water deposition was within these. So it was really fun. So here's some growth examples after the fellowship. Some of them have worked better than others. This is the best one. The proportion of opening to material is good. This is the worst one. It's too large and it dries out too quickly, so we lost about 50% of the species on that. And then this one's too dense, and mold and mildew starts to take place after day 10. So there's a good amount of proportional information we received from this. Where this has taken me, I am, as I said, a faculty at the architecture department. Paul Dalton, who also has a lab here, came down and said hi to me during this time. And we've since been working together, specifically for a studio I ran called Pompidou 2. That was looking about how do we make infrastructure an exterior application as part of our space rather than internalized, using a similar methodology, but then also the technology that they have, melt electrowriting. So working with very small scale material, and how do we couple that with living systems for patterning operations? I'm going to go through this quickly because we have the booklets, but you'll get the gist of it. It's looking at the very small scale. And from this, students were hypothesizing how to do adaptive reuse in our building with this type of technology and patterning. The current research that came from that, not only is what we're doing over the summer, working with the Dalton lab, but running this test study over the summertime with my student that's in-house today, and working with visual programming to look at how these prints and living systems can be coupled. So thank you very much. Yeah, everyone.
Right. Hey, folks. Actually, I should put on a timer as well. My name is Jeremy Rothstein, and I'm an artist originally from Toronto, Canada. I'm now based in Portland, Oregon. I work with computer graphics mostly as a medium, and I have maybe like two kind of weird, separate, use the word weird a lot, I think, today, lines of work. One is actually these kind of historically focused virtual reality projects that explore history of media and technology, and they're kind of architecturally based as well. It's a chance for me to explore the built environment, and also have a kind of interplay between the place where I present the works and the actual architecture that's actually depicted inside of the virtual reality. So those are kind of site-specific works. And then I also make these kind of abstract computer-generated paintings. So the piece on the left is a VR piece I just finished, when was it, in 2021. And it's called Walking a Turtle. And it's a recreation of this kind of curious ritual that apparently took place in Paris in the late 1800s, where the flâneurs, these gentlemen poets, would walk through the arcades, the old malls in Paris, with a turtle on a leash as a way of protesting the changing pace of society at the time. And so I recreated their ritual, but instead of looking at the speed of industrialization, we looked at the sort of like the speed of media and ideas and experience and attention. And so instead of protesting industrialization, they're protesting the attention economy, and viewers kind of go through the experience trying to ignore notifications that come from a fictionalized social media application called the Garogram. I'm going to present that in Portland sometime in the fall. So if you're in Portland, maybe you can catch it. So I spent 3 glorious weeks at U of O in May 2022. The work that I proposed was actually a VR project, sort of dealing with the ecology of the Cascade Mountains. And it quickly became clear to me that it was too ambitious of a project to really take on in 3 weeks, having like really limited 3D design capabilities. I'm really a coder by trade, if you will. And so I sort of took the opportunity to sort of teach myself in a way tree creation in multiple different ways. So I looked at these 3 techniques. I looked at creating trees in a more traditional, like, I guess from a 3D artist standpoint, using Blender. So we're actually going in and designing trunks and just designing branch structures. and then using photogrammetry with an iPad and LiDAR and collections of photographs. And then the third approach was actually using a drone. In Blender, I use this tool called M-Tree, and then also created my own manual tree branching structures. And these results were really visually interesting, somewhat successful, maybe a bit awkward, but the thing that I came to really quickly is that there was just too much geometry, and that's the kind of thing that you're trying to avoid very quickly when you're making VR, which has to run at sort of 90 frames per second. I didn't know the tricks for optimizing at the time, but I sort of feel like I hit a wall, and my one tree was really dense, and there was no quick way to scale it. But I did really like the complexity that I was able to achieve. I've since come back to this with a commercial application called Speed Tree, and have some sort of better results, more compelling trees. The thing that was probably the most successful for me and sort of creatively satisfying was working with photogrammetry, and that's a technique using LiDAR, the sort of 3D sensors on your phone, or collections of photographs. I took my iPad out to the woods and captured pictures around the Diamond Creek Falls area along Highway 58 near Odell Lake. And it was still mid-May. And I caught something that was really magical. I caught these trees that were kind of coming to life after living in the snow for the winter. These were alpine fir and mountain hemlock trees, and they were just kind of bending under the weight of the snow and just coming up to the moment where they were kind of popping out of their holes, and their lower branch structures were just kind of coming up like skirts or something like that. It was really quite fascinating. And for me, coming out to Eugene after hiding in my home with COVID for a year and a bit, I found the sort of determination of the strength and determination of these trees to be really inspiring. I realize I'm already at 5, but I'll quickly go through this. The next thing I tried was with drones. And this was a little bit stressful, just with $1,000 equipment and being a bit of a noise nuisance. Wouldn't want to be the drone guy in public, you know. But I did discover something really interesting, which was spending 10 minutes at a time, sort of hovering at the treetops. So, you know, you have your kind of screen of your drone, and you could just fly up and kind of go up to the top. And I would just kind of stand there with this, looking at the screen, and just kind of like spending, you know, a few minutes of time just with this beautiful view. And so that wasn't really kind of intentional for me to do this, but something I discovered along the way, and maybe hope to explore a little bit later on. Maybe there are kind of tours where people go up with like a FPV drone, which is one of those drones with VR glasses. You just kind of hang out at the tree lines and meditate for a little bit. So the actual project, I'm getting there. All this time I was kind of in awe of the campus where I was coming on a day-to-day basis. And I found this book in the library called Trees of the Oregon Campus. And I discovered that this place is actually an arboretum of sorts. And there's, I guess, according to the self-guided tour that people take, there's 4,000 trees and 500 species. And I sort of had this idea that I would take the kind of magical trees that I captured up in the Tillamook Forest. Is that what it's called? No, I'm sorry, I can't remember the name of it. And I would take those trees that I captured using Willamette, I think, using photogrammetry, and add them to the tour. So I kind of created this application that worked on the iPad, and I created these little, well, they're sort of a little bit more gestural and expressive than really accurate, but these are objects that kind of pop up as you walk across the campus. Yeah, they are kind of weird objects. It makes really, I think, photogrammetry in the state is very primitive and still kind of, I would say, more expressive than accurate. So I kind of ran with that and manipulated a little bit as well to kind of push the language of kind of abstraction. So this ended up being more of it's not really a fully complete project, but more of a proof of concept. Anyway, I'm super grateful to have the opportunity to have been a CPI resident, to have that focused time, that focused 3 weeks to work on something new, but also to have this opportunity to come down to Eugene. I've sort of been meeting with the U of O community sort of in Portland from time to time when the arts department was partially located there. So it was neat to kind of come down in person and connect with some of the people that I had met and sort of meet a few folks as well. So thanks to everybody who was involved in that over the years, and also for kind of orchestrating and also for bringing us together today. I'm really grateful for that.
I'm Robert Ariano. I live in Talent, Oregon, and work in next door Ashland. Not so much flashing really as flickering, with some fast motion video that could cause vertigo. Oh, okay. Remember that? I was just telling my students this morning. Remember to have all of your let's see, I'll just hit request. Remember to have all your videos loaded with access. But I think I'll just jump to my second slide in the meantime. Oops. Yeah. I remember move-in day. It was high summer. There were few students on campus, but a groovy combo of faculty and locals were lurking. And I remember peeking around and seeing this room and saying, "Ooh, I want to present here someday." So, hooray. See if I can make that. I got to hang out with some cool artists like Brian Gillis and familiarize myself a little with the culture at U of O. Turns out the daily struggles of life at an R1 are not so different from a small regional like Southern Oregon University. It took me 20-something tabs to iron out a glitch with my Duck ID. But these first impressions got me an unexpected gem of found text that I titled, "Am I Rare Ellen?" There it is. Which I conveyed into bait to lure looky-loos into my artist's aquarium. And that's actually I love that, Wendy, thank you. The piece that is featured on the last year's cohort slides. So I'm going to try to briefly give myself access to my slides. I think I'll leave this here though, because it's actually one of my favorite artifacts from my time here while I load that. Okay, we're going to do that in quick succession in just a second. But I'm getting ahead of myself because I'm here to talk about the Hypertext Hotel, which is a major early collaborative, interactive, narrative visual work of net art with origins at Brown University in January 1991. It took the idea of hotel as operative metaphor with the public and private spaces that people could navigate between. You could create some materials in your room, but then also go out to the lobby and interact with others and maybe lose a little bit of artistic control that way. As many of you know, Oregon practically invented the idea of hypertext. That is a story that's non-linear, told interactive, and it requires some choice on the part of the reader, audience, viewer. It's a choose your own adventure story on steroids. And I was working on this stuff 32 years ago when I submitted for completion of my grad degree, Brown's first electronic MFA thesis. And as TA for the celebrated postmodernist Robert Coover's first hypertext fiction workshop, I co-created the basic text and the JPEG galleries of the Hypertext Hotel, which grew over 10 years of workshops to incorporate writing and images from more than 100 collaborators, some who've gone on to become Pulitzer Prize winners, fellows in the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, major prize recipients, and in addition, multimedia artists and pioneers of electronic music contributed to the decor and ambiance. Shortly after I left Brown in 2003, the workshops moved on and the university mothballed the Hypertext Hotel, or so I thought. There had to be a backup, right? But 5 years ago, this spring quarter, a group of SOU students and I started poking around to find all that remained was HTTP error 404. At first, I resorted to the Wayback Machine to scrape what fragments I could from the Internet Archive. But after 3 months of twists and turns worthy of their own novel, we finally found a complete intact copy of the last surviving version of all 10 years of work on Professor Robert Coover's old laptop. And we recreated it in Twine, which is a new sort of open source hypertext authoring software that is free. And then a group of students came up with the idea of creating a VR version using Unreal Engine. And the Schneider Museum of Art at Southern Oregon University included the prototype for that VR version in a faculty show. And let's see how this goes. That was the launch of the Hypertext Hotel VR, which was the core of my project here. Let me see real quick now. This is the one I really want to request access for. And here we go. There it is. Thank you, Dimitri. This is going to work fine.
Welcome to the Hypertext book. All newly elected members of the board of directors may read, write, and sleep over here, moving in wherever they feel most comfortable, the whole hotel at their disposal. Guests, too, may range freely. This is not so much a friendly hotel as it is one without proper management, which is to say that within its rooms and corridors, virtually anything can happen. The hotel manager's office is designed to intimidate even before it is seen. Successive anterooms weary the visitor, each door a challenge, each receptionist more hostile than the last. Basement. There are storage rooms in the basement, laundry facilities, exposed plumbing and heating and air conditioning ducts. A furnace, a wine cellar, large freezers, junk coolers and abandoned bicycles, heaps of bottles, broken furniture, dead TVs, vermin, insects, and perhaps other creatures as well.
Rooms are still being added on to and voiceover recordings. Sometimes when the ice machine is empty, you can look down and see your own reflection in the steel bottom. And sometimes it changes a bit. And then it talks to you.
The halls of the hotel echo into the distance. You were looking for something? Someone you looking? Wires and pipes project aimlessly from the walls, and the papers strewn around reek of garden oil and blackmail.
So that was just a sort of a combo of a process video by one of the creators, Quinn Jacobus, and a walkthrough with the voiceover by Robert Coover. Let me see if I can progress here. Escape. There we are. And back. So shortly after this exhibition at the Schneider Museum and before COVID, I started to hear about the Center for Arts Research and the possibility of the fellowships. And that's when it occurred to me that I had probably the only existing version of this legacy of net art and the now emerging virtual reality version. So when I applied, it was with the goal of an architecture for the Hypertext Hotel, VR, and creating a plan for its preservation and perpetuation. And of course, I was staying at a hotel. So that offered a lot of inspiration as well. But perhaps the best was the students and the faculty and artists who stopped by, Knight Campus staff. And by interacting with that sole CPU-bound prototype of the VR version, reminded me what to wish for in the affordances of a major early collaborative, interactive, and 3D immersive work of narrative visual art. Plus, there were lots of cool 3D printers downstairs for fun breaks. My biggest revelation in my own right came on like page 88 of the Moleskine that I filled up with thoughts during my August residency. And that was that it's just a hotel. It belongs to the world. But instead of one you travel to, the Hypertext Hotel has the possibility to travel to you. So the next chance I got, I decided I would devote a longer residency to teaching and building with a new group of students, both the original text and the new VR versions of the hotel. Fresh off CFAR, I learned about something called CDN, the Center for Digital Narrative. And that's when I decided I would apply and go to Bergen, Norway, which will be this August, exactly a year actually to the day from when I started my CFAR residency, and continue work on the Hypertext Hotel with this really kind of cool new Center for Research Excellence at the Universitet i Bergen. And all of this would never have been possible without the Center for Arts Research. So thank you, Brian, Colin, and Wendy.
I think what we should do is, since we're running a little long, I think we should have the next group come up and then we'll open up for conversation at the end so that everyone gets a chance to do the presentation. We'll actually ask Jordy to be the intermission because Jordy's been like the key player for many of us, not exclusively, but for the majority of us, Jordy's been the key player. And I thought it'd be fun to get her input in terms of just showing some of the behind the scene processes of working with artists in this context. Thanks, Jordy.
We hold off for ahead. Okay. Hello, my name is Jordy Helmick. I am a University of Oregon alum. I got my BFA in art and technology here a few years ago. I now work as the manager for the fabrication lab located in the basement here. So I work under the umbrella of technical sciences administration, not the other TSA. We mostly work for researchers on campus. So there's a lot of emphasis in our work on precision engineering. We work with both additive and subtractive manufacturing, meaning we do both 3D printing and machining. So we have 3- and 5-axis mills, laser cutters, water jet cutters,
a CNC lathe, a laser welder, a high quality 3D scanner that's been extremely popular in this group, as well as a suite of 3D printers that use both FDM and SLS technology. We can print in various polymer resins, nylon, carbon fiber, and titanium. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, sweet. So I just kind of wanted to start with an in-process view of the Osborne terrain that we did for Colin. So you can see here, we started with a flat sheet in our 3-axis CNC mill, and then we kind of roughed out the steps in the terrain and then went in with a ball end mill and smoothed it out. I love this part of the process where you can see it kind of transforming from just these rough steps to this like really smooth geometry at the end. So the process generally for the work we do is that researchers will come to us with a problem or a napkin sketch, sometimes a 3D model if they're that prepared. And then we'll propose what material will work best with their application, what manufacturing method we should use, and give them a cost estimate. Generally, the parts that we make for researchers on campus are heavily geometric, so like a lot of flat plates with threaded holes or like round sample holders. And they also have high tolerances, so like within a couple thousandths or within 100 microns, which is like a strand of hair. So very precise work. And that's very much in contrast to the work that we've done with the artists here, where the napkin sketch or the problem is usually much more abstracted. It's a lot more organic shapes like this. And there's usually not very much, if any, emphasis on achieving precision. I found a lot of artists actually revel in the limitations of manufacturing, having to deal with the tool radius or even like little blips in the process. I'll be so afraid to show an artist a part and they're like, this is amazing. I love that this happened. So I really, really enjoy that part of the process. And I think that this very different approach to manufacturing from our day-to-day precision work has taught us a lot about our tools and our capabilities as well. So it's a very symbiotic relationship. And I'll move to the next slide here. Just another couple kind of in progress views. This is some of the innards of Karen Bollender's compost generator. So those are all the thermoelectric generators that we use. So we use the temperature differential between the cool water and the hot compost to create electricity, which was really fun. And then on the right there is a layout of all of the designs that we cut out of a sheet for Jessie Rose Valla out of brass. It was really fun. It's hard to tell the scale just looking at it, but the leaf is like probably about this big, and the little patterns on it were very fine work. So it was a lot of fun. 3D scanning, as I mentioned, has been really popular in the CPI program. We have a high resolution 3D scanner that allows for rapid digitization of organic shapes, whether it's a twig, which you can see here, we 3D scanned and then printed a twig, or a seed pod for Colin, a ceramic sculpture, or a spruce root clam basket for Sarah. Eowyn Businger, who is not here today, she is a product design student who's been with TSA since 2020, has been leading all of the scanning work that we've done. And it's really wonderful because it can create one-of-a-kind 3D models that are infinitely reproducible. I don't see Jen here today, but I wanted to show some in progress work that we did with her. This was an acoustic mirror that we made. If you're not familiar with an acoustic mirror, they were used a lot during World War II to hear enemy planes coming. They were very large concrete structures. So she kind of wanted to play with that idea and create a smaller version. So we made about a 6-inch model, which you can see here, and that has the tool paths that were generated to cut it out of a block of aluminum. And then because it has an angled surface, it ended up being best to run it in our 5-axis mill. So you can see on the right there, it's not the best image, but that is the part running in the 5-axis mill. So in addition to the 3 axes of the tool, it has the ability to tilt and swivel your part so that you can get more complex geometry. The last example that I wanted to show was also for Jen Vaughn. We did a lot of fun machining for her in the past couple weeks. This was a worm grunting tool. To my understanding, you put it in the ground and then hit it with another stick, and it basically emulates the vibrations of rain and causes worms to come up to the surface. And so Jen created this design based on a shoreline. I can't remember which shore. And so I helped her clean up the 3D model and get it so that it was manufacturable. And then you can see kind of the simulated tool paths on the left there. And similar to the work that we did for Colin, it started as a solid aluminum block, and then we roughed out the steps in the geometry. And then you can see that the ball and mill is going in there and smoothing everything out at the end. And so just for a sense of scale, this is about just under 2 feet long. So it was a nice big cut. And I just also wanted to mention that for the orrery that we did for Colin, that was really fun because we got to combine so many different ways of working because we 3D scanned, which you can see up here at the end if you would like. We 3D scanned a leaf, a flower, and a seed pod, and then 3D printed them, and we machined gears for the movement. So it was really bringing together a lot of different technologies that we work with. And one more note about, sorry, going a little out of order, about this that I really enjoyed is we were trying to figure out scale because the parabolic shape in the inside determines the focal distance to pick up the sound. And Jen really wanted it to be usable initially, but to make it a long enough focal distance to really be worthwhile, it would have been so shallow that you couldn't see it. And so I thought it was really interesting that we actually ended up going with more of an aesthetic consideration than utility, which pretty much never happens when we're working with scientific researchers. And it turned out amazing. So I'm glad that we did go that way. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to the Center for Art Research, Knight Campus, and the Ford Family Foundation for supporting this incubator residency and enabling this interdisciplinary collaboration between the arts, science, and manufacturing on campus. Thank you. And if anyone's interested in our services, I have some business cards with contact information.
I think I speak for all of us when I thank you from the bottom of my heart for all your work. You've been incredible in the program. It's really essential. All right, can we have the next group of residents up? Sarah, can we start with you since you like span? It's lovely. We have a couple of Joan Druckenbrode's objects here. And Joan is not a member of the residency program, but is an affiliated faculty, research faculty. And Sarah was last year, and then this year became a fellow. So we've had that kind of continuity among a couple of the artists in the program.
I'm gonna need a wizard up here to help me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I thought my spectacles would do it, but no. I didn't have time, but I was right. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Sarah Seastream. I'm a Mohannis Coos tribal member, artist, and educator. Am I hitting the mic? Can you hear me? Okay. My gallery put this together. I didn't realize it'd be a huge me with me, so sorry for the whatever that is. Well, that's a winnowing basket I made that belongs to the Halley Fort, so you can go visit that anytime you'd like. But it's made out of spruce root. I used huckleberry dye and mud dye for that. The mud dye I gathered at the place of beginning, where the origin story for my people is located in the Coos Bay estuary. Like probably everyone in this room, I'm a person who was born with a pretty strong sense of social conviction. And I have dedicated my life to making work that helps out the people and the land. I'm a painter first. It's my first language. I grew up in a family of artists and educators. My dad and stepmom became architects here at the U of O in the 70s and 80s. So I was that's where my childhood kind of memories begin. I also grew up on the Lower McCoy River Valley, so I have that very rural. And then we moved to Portland, so back and forth between two kind of different sorts of environment. I went to school at Portland State. Then I went to grad school out in Brooklyn, New York. So I like also really super urban environments. I make paintings that are very abstract. My practice also branches into education and institutional reform. So I've taught collegiate arts for 13 years. Institutions hire me to help them become less racist. It's pretty fun work. I do a lot of things, and it's all kind of embedded in these art objects I make, and then I can unpack a bunch of stories through that, which I will do for you today in 5 minutes or less. Probably already used 3 of that, sorry. Maybe, okay, so let's start with what I did here. So this is a clam basket. It's made out of spruce root that I dug in Jordan Cove in the Coos Bay estuary. That's named after 4th generation family members of mine. So the Hannes-Coos people, that's where our village sites are. So back to the beginning of human kind of beings on the planet, we're all from there. You might be familiar that there was a ecological threat going on in that zone. There was an LNG project that had spent about 13 years trying to destroy it. So when I dug these roots, that was still happening. We were still under that threat. So the idea that I came into the U of O with, that we did an exhibition kind of around at the Jordan Sister Museum, had to do with some of those things. So I built this basket, and I wanted to be able to replicate it in large numbers and put those in public to bring people's awareness into what was going on. And so I had met a ceramics artist, Brett Binford, who runs Mud Shark Studios. And I had wanted him to make a mold of this basket so that we could do that. We could repeat it over and over again. A basket like this takes a few years to make. So I couldn't physically make a whole bunch of them in time. So I made this basket to do this work with him. And then I brought it to him, and he was like, well, it'll destroy the basket. And he wasn't willing to do that because I told him how endangered these roots were. This will be the last one if that happened. And so, and then the pandemic happened. And so everything went on hold. Fast forward to U of O and all this exhibition that we were planning. So I was given a research kind of free pass to the university, and we were walking around, and we came into this building, and I was like, oh, maybe here with these incredible wizards, we can do the things that we need to do. So we started to work together. Kazi and Jory and Jordi and all the people here really jumped in, and it was very exciting. So this talks about the land. I'll fast forward. So we brought this basket in, and then I brought this basket into this cap. So this one's called Aretha. So I said social consciousness, right? So my belief is if we take care of the people can take care of the land, and then the land can take care of us. But we have to, both sides have to be okay. I'm a woman. I'm connected to female experience, and as everybody also in this room knows, we're always at risk, and things are coming back around that we haven't seen in a long time. I was born in 1976. My father loves Motown, so I grew up in that kind of like world. And Aretha Franklin, of course, is sort of the boss of all of that. And she passed a few years ago, and I just think of her with such gratitude for all of the work that she did and what she put on the planet having to do with female power and uplifting our experience. So this is a dance cap named after her. I made it the year that she passed. And it's, there's a million stories there, but I know we have a long way to go. So anyway, I brought these 2 objects in to work with the U of O. And so we made these incredible things. So I call these the transtemporal baskets. So that's like having to do with time travel. So we made these, then we get into ceramics, but it was really exciting because During the time that all of these things happened, we actually were able to defeat this LNG project. So this being here encapsulates this overcoming of this ecological disaster that was on its way. That usually we don't win that kind of stuff, and nobody makes a big deal about it when you win. Like they talk about it when everything falls to pieces, but I just feel like we should have objects that we can point to and say, hey, cross-culturally, we were able to stop something, we were able to fix something. And these beautiful objects that seem so kind of serene and nonviolent, which they are, end up having like tremendous political legs. And I guess the story I'm supposed to tell you here is how making a basket can stop a pipeline. So one of the laws that those kind of terrorists have to overcome is that's set up around sovereign rights, is that if tribal people are still using a resource and somebody wants to come and destroy it, they have to be able to move it or replace it. Now, the ecosystems that we gather these kinds of things in are thousands of years old. You can't move them and you can't replace them. And so, but you have to prove that you're using it. So I created a weaving program for my community. These weaving practices haven't been enacted in over 100 and some odd years because of colonization and those long stories. So in my work, I was bringing this back for my people, which meant that we were actually doing it. So for 5 years, we were gathering and weaving. And then I was every opportunity I got to have an exhibition, I put the weaving materials in public and I put the student baskets in public so that publicly we were doing this and using the land. And I am also a real nerd about following the rules. So instead of going out there like punks and protesting through direct action, I would go the long way and I would get the permits and I would go to the federal government and the state government and say, we're going to do this. We're going to do it on this day. Give me the permit because it is my legal right to do this. And please leave us alone because we'll be in a state of prayer. So it was also paper trail. So gossamer layers of protection around our ancestors, which are the land and the plant beings. So by doing that for these 5 years, this was one of the insurmountable hurdles that these LNG projects couldn't overcome. And we were just one of the players that protested through these nonviolent, militant pacifist ways that look like just sweet little baskets. And because all the other communities were doing what they could do who were against it, we were able to defeat this. And so through the life of this project, we had that winning happen. And so the meaning of this basket shifted dramatically. For women's rights, not as happy of times, as you should know. So here's her. Okay, so this is the final outcome for where I am now in ceramics. So I've named this one, this basket stops pipelines. And so that blue color, that kind of seafoam green, it's this one color in the ocean. It's the color of those old cars. My family worked on cars, you know, those kind of men. And so those things mean a lot to me, those colors. And then, so that's the inside. It also just looks like clean water, right? And originally I'd wanted these baskets to look like they'd gone through an oil spill, right? So that's how they were gonna be. And I will play with black, but this ended up being this kind of ghostly, pure look that I got really attached to. So that's what that one is. And then to speak to the militant pacifism of social justice, this is what I'm doing with these caps. This one's called Minion, four-legged spider. So an eight-legged spider is okay, 4 is probably pretty mad, right? So these are protectors, and there's a million stories embedded there, but I have all these incredible people I want to give time to too. So I'll share those horrific stories with you on another day. But these minion are built to both simultaneously uplift the good and punish the bad, and to make this line in history where I can then open the door to start talking about reproductive rights and all the things that go on with this thing, and to bring in color theory. So this red and this green together are striking act of love for the viewer. So when when fresh blood hits that green, if you're in a state of trauma, you don't get as stressed out. So it's why medical facilities are painted that green. So when I put them together, and the inside of the cap also is painted that green. So when I put them together, I'm letting you know that something really super dangerous is going on, but I'm also trying to soothe you while I talk to you about it, because I also, in that sense of social justice, have a responsibility not to hurt you while I'm calling you to action. And I'm making a line in history that things are going on. So all of that to say, couldn't have done any of this without many of the people in this room and the ability to collaborate with all of these people who in their particular lives have gone to acquire all the things that they have done with their intellect and their amazing abilities to work with me on these things. So this is really, I'm sorry, I've maybe blown up the computer. I don't know it all about, oh, you can't see it, but there's a bunch of weird things happening there. Anyway, I'm really honored to be with you all here again in this place that I was a very little girl and came from. And it's a big deal for my family that we are again embraced by this community and getting to make our work within the place that we come from. So thank you.
Crazy.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Fix it.
I'm. Hi, everybody. I'm Julieta, and I'm a visiting professor here at UO. I've been teaching here for 1.5 years. This is coming to an end for me, but it has been such a special experience to be here. And a lot of the work that I did for CFAR has to do with just the time spent here, working on my personal archive and thinking of ways, to work with it within the support that I received. And so throughout my work here and the work that I've done back home in Mexico, I'm always thinking about archive and memory and the different meanings of memory and how it manifests both digitally and physically. And so over the last year here, I've been collecting numerous 3D scans of plants, flowers, and the outdoors in Oregon. And it's a process that other fellows have mentioned too, but I work a lot with photogrammetry. And for me, a very important part of this action is not just the file itself, but the action of like observing something from 360 degrees while I'm recording it. And I think it's a way for me to also index a memory into my brain. And then obviously working on this, I have so many files to deal with, hundreds and hundreds of files that I need to like sparse, videos that need to be converted into images that then get input into software. And it's gotten to a point where it's kind of made me think too about like, where is all of this stored? And so thinking about like the invisibility of data centers and how remote they are, and the kind of space that they're also occupying. And so this action of remembering is in a way also kind of destroying in parallel. And so for this, I decided to work on making a solar server as my medium to store my archive. And this part of the project is still in process, but the idea is to be able to have a solar powered server that, you know, it's a sort of archive that actually lives from the sun, which to me is also interesting because usually you want to like hide
anything you archive from the sun. And so exposing it to the sun became something that was of interest to me. And also the idea of locations and geographies and, you know, if I could bring this back with me to Mexico, but I'd be storing objects that are from here and how we could kind of start thinking about borders differently too. And then all of this was inspired by this project that I found out during the research I was doing, and it's the Solar Protocol. It's a website that's a huge network of solar powered servers that sustain it, and they use it to also like hold different kind of artist projects within it. And then the one thing I did learn is that obviously this will kind of affect the way that the work is made and stored, right? There's so much amount of storage that I can have in my own solar server. And so this is gonna affect, yeah, the resolution of my work and how it looks in the end. So these are some results experimenting with some of the scans that I had, translating them into physical form, because for me, I think it's also important to think of like material memory and recreating spaces. So kind of taking these images that were stored in my head and then putting them out again as physical form. And it was also a lot had to do with, again, like these lower resolution scans and how these lower resolutions would create certain glitches or errors in the 3D model. So in the end, it's a little bit like the way that memory works. We don't really remember things exactly the way they happened, or sometimes we just alter our own perception of memory. I also created a series of images and videos that I've been also using for audiovisual performances. And this is also just an ongoing work. But for this, a lot of the photographs that get converted into texture maps for the 3D models, I kind of worked on different dithering methods. So again, to lower the resolution of my photographs, I looked into different image dithering algorithms that reduce the amount of color information and therefore make the files smaller. And so these are just some results from those experiments. And this is maybe like a zoomed in, a little bit dark in the projector, but it's like a zoomed in version. And it's just to show the way that, yeah, information, again, being reduced into a limited number of colors and how that turns out in the end. And yeah, thank you to CFAR for all the support.
Okay. Hi, I'm Agnes. I'll just dive into the first thing that happened when I started my residency was this big whiteboard that I just went right ahead and drew out my thoughts as I was going into it. I had a lot of ideas and thinkers that I wanted to engage with. So I had a lot of sort of books, I guess, that were part of this, but I was reading Juliana Bruno's Atmospheres of Projection, thinking about atmosphere and immersion and psychic projection, sort of in relation to physical space and dwelling in physical space as sort of this embodied experience. And because I'm a performer as well, I'm thinking about all of this in relation to skill and improvisation. So one of the avenues that I wanted to pursue for this residency was to contact the motor skill lab at the UO and just kind of find out what they do there. And what came out of that was kind of a confirmation of my own methods of working, which is sort of creating protocols for performance and then sort of enacting them. And in that inaction, the work is produced. But really setting very clear parameters around the performance, and that's sort of what they do as well. They have very particular, very simple instructions, and they have this room that's sort of has a copper mesh that lines the room so that there's no electronic interference. And even that is really interesting to me, sort of really limiting the space and then sort of studying what happens in that space. So, so I developed a choreography that's sort of more of a protocol that's improvisational. Just started playing that. I developed some sort of core movement ideas. I also created an animation, a 3D animation to go along with this live performance. And I created sound for it as well. In terms of the movement, I was really thinking about exploring the articulations of my body and sort of the reach out from my body into space, and also thinking about sort of mechanical idea of the body as a tool or as a sort of as a tool that you can use to perform certain actions, but how that idea is sort of broken down in the moment of actually enacting movement. There's another video that shows a different part of the performance. The performance was 15 minutes long. It's weight to the palm of your hand. Interest down to the floor. Your body takes the shape of the bells. Towards to the body. Face change until it's not strained. Part of your body from the end of the flesh. When it's tension, a little sensibilize producing feedback. Swimming around is of light in the air, entering all inclusive. So I was also thinking about sort of the projection as a mediation between virtual and physical space. And that has been important throughout my time here, is sort of the virtual and the real. And I was initially thinking about really interacting with the sort of tactile surfaces of this building and thinking about the affordances of the space. And I discovered that it's a very smooth space, which is a very sort of interesting thing to think about in relation to the virtual, because the virtual is also a very smooth space. And I guess there's a an unresolved question for me, which is what happens or what does that do to agency in public space if there's nothing to grab onto, if you sort of float through. I don't know what the answer to that is, but it's still something that I think about. So there's like a sense of freedom with that, but then it also means that there's no impact from your movement. Nothing changes around you. You're sort of just floating around. Okay, so the text or what I was reading in the performance, I mentioned these this idea of a handheld device. And so the other part of my residency was to create some clay objects as these handheld devices that are, I didn't have a specific plan for them. I just wanted them to be sort of formed, I guess, improvisationally with the clay and with my hands, but thinking about like knobs and indentations and crevices to explore. And one of the things that came out of that was this realization that the affordances of our bodies are other bodies. Like when I was creating these shapes, I felt like I was creating creatures, that they became these other bodies that fit with my hands. And there's actually something, I know I'm running out of time. There's something that Phillida Barlow said in an interview that I thought was so interesting. She said that to actually touch a sculpture closes off the imagination, that it's a more complex experience to be drawn to touch, but to project that rather than to actually touch it. So there's again this sort of idea of the virtual. Okay, so I have to go out of presentation mode briefly to show you these scanned versions. So these are sort of the 3D models that were that Eowyn created by laser scanning my clay objects that I have here as well that you can look at. Not sure what I'm going to do with those quite yet, but yeah, so I have my 3 objects so far, and I might make more. And I guess just as a closing slide, I'm thinking about a lot of the same things as when I started. So I'm not sure that I've sort of reached a conclusion, but it's been a really great experience, and I keep sort of building on what I've started here. So thank you so much.
Okay. Microphone. All right, so it's really great, obviously, to have a month of research and have that kind of be the goal of the research. Finally, got to a lot of books I wanted to, checked out tons from the library, walked them over, loved the whiteboard. Yeah, I began with thoughts largely about speculative narratives that could explore the psychological and corporal effects of climate migration relating to both human and non-human life. I've been reading a lot of those articles that have been coming out about range migration, how certain tree species due to warming climates are moving west or north. And I think for me, knowing about current range migration furthers this reality that we are all truly entangled in this big, glorious mess of relations, human and non-human alike, with deep effects together. So I'm curious to create work that somehow can tell of how we are deeply entangled with a bit of mythic and fantastical approach. So during my time, I had kind of 3 different trajectories I was working on. So yeah, and checking out the facilities here, I really just scraped the surface of them. There's so many things to explore. But I largely ended up tripping off the 3D scanner and the fuser, which I labeled the form fuser. And so it seemed like an interesting chance to be able to incorporate various elements to be scanned and printed. So one of the things I worked on was this tree truss, originally made from plasticine clay with tree parts embedded. There are tree parts from redwood, white oak, American beech, all trees noted for range migration. And I see this kind of, this figure ultimately sitting on these like tall kind of stoneware base with the narrative release that will go more into these kind of, yeah, kind of fantastical but tied to life narratives. So yeah, here is this little dude getting 3D scanned downstairs, so you can see how things are kind of embedded in it. There's also this hybridity in this entire process with materials, form, and obviously with this, there's a nod to the mythos of chimera. And meanwhile, I went down the trippy wormhole of how there is a large database being collected of scans of ancient artifacts and fossils, right? You can go online and download a 3D file and print ancient objects. And also just to see these objects on screen from vastly different times and places. And to know that now you can just like print it. I mean, it's such a wild mind fuck almost. But this caught my imagination, and it's like this strange sort of spatial travel, time travel translation of objects that's kind of happening. So this led me to finding this 3D scan of an ancient amphora, and I have a history in ceramics. So this particular form has always killed me. It's just very hyper beautiful. Also talks of time, of vast trade works, and ultimately the fall of these. Also, one of the many books that I came across was this book called The Book of Invasions. It's a mytho-historical text written by an unknown author in the 11th century AD. It recounts a series of invasions in which multiple waves of people invade Ireland over several thousand years. It draws from inspiration from Celtic and Greek mythology, as well as the Bible. And there's characters that are descendants of biblical figures, such as Noah, and the flood is mentioned. Of what caught my attention was CFAR, an early goddess of Ireland and great leader, and a granddaughter of Noah, who was refused entry onto the ark, so decided to create one of her own. And she led a large group of people to Ireland in the hope of starting afresh there. And she built a fleet of 3 ships, which she populated with many capable women, each with a different skill. So I just thought that was like a kind of wondrous story. So out of that, these are actually being printed right now. There's going to be these 3 prints that are form fused, and there'll be these 3 vessels. They're going to be kind of smaller. And basically I'm going to make like a large kind of wall necklace per se. That's going to be a chain of stoneware. And it'll be like, there'll also be like these kind of charms and these 3 vessels. And it will also be incorporated into this like kind of mythic ecological narrative that I'm developing. All right, lastly, I decided I wanted to make this like kinshipping device. You know, I also finally read Donna Haraway's Staying with Trouble, which was great because anyway, all this other stuff came up that I had already been researching. So it was like, you know, it's great when you have a book around for like 3 years and then finally you're like, perfect. So this is ultimately, it's going to be this like kind of large stoneware staff. And these brass components, again, are based off these like specific tree species. And these are the ones that Jordy helped cut out, which I'm glad you said it was fun. It seemed really hard. And then ultimately embedded in it is going to be this USB microphone to record ultrasonic sounds. So here's a little bit. I brought a couple of them too, but here's some of that brass, kind of a little more up close. And then this ultra mic, UM200K. So it detects and records biological ultrasounds for bioacoustic studies, insects, rodents, bats, but also ultrasonic noise emitted by the TV, computers, and power adapters. And of course, I really want to see if I can like capture like the clicking of plants and that sound. And I just think it'd be really interesting to create this like whole kind of Malou sound piece with it. And perhaps it is a staff and it's going to be awkward and weird. So maybe some like video or performative gestures with it. So we'll see what happens. All right. Thank you. And thank you so much for the support. Always so big.
Okay, I recognize I'm the last thing standing between you and a break. So I will do my best. Let's go to. Yes, I write out everything. Okay, so I am in the middle of my residency, actually. It's not completed. So I have basically just going to show you hopefully a 5-minute rabbit hole into what I've been thinking about. I've really been spending most of my time just reading, thinking about a new body of work, which has been really exciting and restorative for me. So huge thanks to CFAR, U of O, Ford Family Foundation, all the committee members who gave me this opportunity. It's just amazing to have the gift of time and space. It's very, very appreciated. And yeah, so what you see is this current project started in many ways by thinking about dysmorphia and how I might use furniture or domestic implied objects as a stand-in for bodies or metaphor for bodies in order to ultimately explore interpersonal relationships. And yet so much of this idea or concept of dysmorphia is tied to precedent, what our understanding of what a body is, what is standardized, what it should look like, and so forth. So I started to think about what the representation of body might look like in non-Euclidean space, partially because so many of the tools and technologies that we use to build in digital fabrication spaces, 3D modeling, many sculptural mediums that others have, I use and have and kind of raised or trained to use are tied to building industries, structural, mechanical applications, so Q, Home Depot and CAD software. And obviously we live in this Euclidean world, space and time, but I wanted to think about vision, perspective, representation and form in ways that gesture toward a body residing elsewhere and possibly less dependent on human-centered vision or perspective. Ultimately, I think what I'm interested in making are models or objects that gesture toward something that's not rooted in our representational world. So topologies of space, different forms or models like this hyperbolic paraboloid that try to represent non-Euclidean space kind of became things I was looking at. Things that I was starting to research and look into. I was modeling them, I just started modeling them, combining them together, thinking about ways a body might interact with them like a piece of furniture. But I was also, or am, somewhat unmoved by these objects. They look very mathy and geometric. They don't get into the wanting, the desirous, the sexual, the animate part of the body, or the side of the body that feels very missing for myself, which brought up this reference to ukiyo culture, or specifically ukiyo-e prints from the Edo period, which is often, ukiyo-e is often translated as a floating world, right? That simultaneously has Buddhist references as well as reference to what you might consider a more hedonistic lifestyle of the Edo period that was brought about by many things, including a change in the merchant class. So this is an example of shunga or erotica that was part of this tradition that some of the most famous woodblock artists like Hakusai partook in regularly, who's probably most famous for the Great Wave off Kanazawa. And currently up actually in the Schnitzer Museum is an exhibition of prints. So been spending time on campus and looking, going to the library, and I was in this exhibition. And it even talks about how in this period, Japan was increasingly influenced by the West, and you start to see this evolution in the aesthetic, stylistic, and sort of moral shifts in the depiction of bodies, most evident in these beauty prints. So rather than thinking of the body as an erotic one, it starts to become an object of beauty. And that is like, that coincides with the influence of the West. This one's entitled Reading. So however, Itazume, which is this Japanese tattoo culture, also has all these references to the similar Edo period, but the traditions remain largely unchanged. And that's partly because the change in technology and the advent of photography radically shifted ukiyo-e print and print culture as a whole. So the style of representation actually remains pretty stable within the tattoo culture for a very long time and doesn't show that same influence and sort of shift in the pictorialism on the same drastic way. So right now I'm in the process of kind of wondering how I combine maybe this patterning, this iconography, the wrapping of fabrics and textiles in positions of pleasure, wanting, and desire onto the surface of these hyperbolic models or objects. And I think if I can etch into the surface of the three-dimensional prints, then I can use the three-dimensional object like a wood block and make laser cut shapes on paper, perhaps, that will wrap around the objects. So it's been a very slow process teaching myself Fusion 360, which they use in the lab here. Trying to, we've been like brainstorming different ways to maybe try to emboss two-dimensional imagery onto the three-dimensional object. You can see I'm even trying to put the same kind of patterning just as a sort of a background texture onto the object. But I have a friend who works more with gaming software that revealed to me the ability to maybe bake a texture into an object, and that will actually shift the geometry. So that's kind of my next step. But ultimately, I'm hoping to make prints, ceramic or stone-like three-dimensional wood blocks, and possibly furniture-like objects to make a stage for domestic space, where I'll work with performers to enact out interpersonal relationship dramas and family sculpting scenarios with my kids, or they probably won't do that. So I'll have to get actors to function as stand-ins for them. So yeah, that's where I'm going with that.
This has been an incredible pleasure, I mean, one of the great things about this event is like all these people who've experienced the residency separately now actually get to see what happened there. And it's an amazing gift. So again, even though we have a small audience, we have each other as an audience, which has been really lovely. We do have a reception, so there's plenty of time to talk to people individually. Should we just have a few questions now and then get to the food, and then that will allow kind of more organic exchange rather than trying to do a whole panel discussion something? Just any kind of observations or quick questions for any of the individual artists from either group?
Well, I really am something to Sarah a while ago and also there. I really enjoyed the very open nature of the residencies, and that they're very experimental and speculative, also sort of grappling with the possibilities of it. I guess I don't know if I have a question, but I really want to share with some artists about, it's like a limited residency. We have a lot of possibilities there. We have some sort of idea, and just want to hear a little bit about, this idea of outcome-based objectives versus, because you still want to work with tech, you still want to make an object, but then also everything that kind of comes into your hand and play in front of you, and how you can make a decision in 2 or 3 weeks and a half. I guess maybe that's a very cost-oriented art question from artists.
I jump on it. And I think this was something that we all have kind of experienced over the last however many, it's been 3 years. I think pandemic like shattered all that kind of stuff, right? Everybody became really flexible and loose and fluid and open, and all kinds of things started moving, having to do with our conception of time and results and all of that kind of thing. And I found that not only in this residency, but most of the institutions I work with have been kind of like, do your best, like be nice and try hard. And that's what we're all doing. And so my relationship here started before this fellowship, and it's continued because it's like we're in relation, right? And so it's more like nature versus this other kind of linear binary. It's like do this, do that, the end, right? And so I feel like that's what's really beautiful. Is there's going to be interesting things like after the forest fire that new seeds are going to be let loose. So that's how I hear your question, how I respond to it immediately. I'm like, I'm excited about this. This is something beautiful that came from this really, really terrifying thing that we all went through together.
I think maybe the open-ended process, or like the open-ended format, it takes more time. I find, at least, it's sort of because you have to be sort of open to what's happening. It takes longer to sort of contend with what you're doing as you're doing it, versus like, I have this plan, I'm going to execute it to produce this thing, right? So I think that's just an observation that I have. And I think that's why whatever, like what I was doing when I was actually here at the Knight Campus keeps going. It's sort of, I'm still working on it because it's not, there wasn't sort of an end point really. It's sort of ongoing.
I really think about how many of these projects, like one, they spilled over and we made arrangements for people, like Karen's heat thing only got done in the summer after the residency, and she was the first resident. So some of that is like occurred in the point of the residency, but also I think just in terms of the ideas, it's really clear that the ideas expand beyond that no matter what. And that, you're right, like what can actually happen in 3 or 4 weeks is like, again, like really different for each of us in terms of like where we were with an idea and what happened during that time period, but inevitably it's going to be unfinished. And I think that that's part of the reality for all of us in very different ways. And that's what's kind of exciting to hear today, is how many different ways. Like I had the residency after Carla, and I found myself loving something that she did that I never did during my residency. And I like, oh, what a missed opportunity. You actually like talk to people in the building, and like they knew when you were in, and like this was so soon after COVID that like there were a very finite number of people actually coming through this building, and Carla must probably knew all of them. And I so admired that. Like I wasn't able to enact that, but I really admired it so much. And again, like now we see that the collaborative nature of our work allowed that, and we also see like where that opportunities can sprout in very different ways. So yeah, thought about that a lot. But it's just interesting how different, like it's this parallel very different outcomes, but kind of a parallel reality about not that much is going to get done in a fixed period of time. Thank you for coming in the middle of your residency.
Yeah.
So like, a special gift.
The brain dump.
Great. All right, let's go have some food, and then you can approach us and we can talk to each other. And thank you so much for coming. I'm so glad we have this recorded. Yes, a real gift.
So awkward.
Reception. Okay, so yeah, we have the reception upstairs on the mezzanine. Tons of food, like about for 50 people or something. Yeah. So make sure you go upstairs. Mary, you're leaving. Make sure you get some food.
So 3 weeks are up.
Yeah, that.
Moved right on.
Moved right on.
Yeah.
This is very awesome. You're taking on the fusion.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to actually use a different program now. Again, a friend mentioned like, oh, you can, I don't know how familiar you are with VR or with like gaming, and you have to use these polygonal models that Jeremy kind of alluded to.
Yeah,
You can't have anything too complex.
yeah.
So they have things where you can put a texture on them and fake
Okay.
out
Yeah.
what it looks
I
like.
kind of know that. I know
Yeah,
that.
Yeah, so I guess in the last year, they've now made it to where you can take a texture, so I can turn an image into a texture.
Yeah.
Put it on it, and it normally doesn't change the geometry of the three-dimensional object. Now there's like a plugin you can.
Oh,
So
cool.
I'll
So then
take-
it can kind
I
of
can take it.
engrave or like.
Yeah, I
blend
can
these
take like a,
lines.
I want to just kind of take folds of pattern that
Yeah.
basically represent bodies and
Yeah.
positions and shapes, and then superimpose that and turn
Yeah.
that into an image that then
Yeah.
like would have to be, these would also have to be like figured out how they would look folded flat, and then
Yeah.
laser cut paper or textiles to then wrap around and on all sides of
Totally,
the
okay.
them like wood block. I know it's kind of hard to represent
Yeah.
like what I mean by a wood block.
Yeah, but I
Instead
think
of
it was kind of,
Instead of
yeah,
a flat thing, I'm
Yeah.
making three-dimensional wood block
yeah,
objects.
yeah, that's, yeah. No, I got
Okay.
that. I think you did a good job,
Okay.
like relating that, you know,
Okay.
and that's why I was just like, oh, whoa, like I had this kind of flash vision. of it.
Yeah, yeah.
That'd be so cool. But yeah, it seems like the steps to it are like quite complex.
Well, this is
right?
very slow, so I'm like,
Yeah,
maybe there's gotta be a workaround.
Yeah.
And I think I might have found it, but that's the
Yeah.
next thing. I'm gonna- Yeah, probably in Blender, which we happily get out of. Yeah, and this is, you know,
That's the
well, this is a
favorite
lesbian couple, and
Yeah.
then, you know, yeah, it was just very interesting to see like all this morality suddenly come in.
yeah, it is
And-
so, yeah.
Like, that's a very different image than that.
Mhm.
And you can immediately see the
You see the
difference
shit.
in how the body is viewed as an object. So, yeah.
I think I realized that I have to
Wait.
turn off the recording.
Oh my God, you've been talking. That help? Oh,
Editing.
Yes.